Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our next video in our 50 Reasons Why Jesus Came to Die series. Today's reason is number 22, which is that Jesus suffered and died to bring us to God. Christians talk a lot about the gospel, good news. Christianity is news. It's good news at its heart. It has good news to give. Well, what is the ultimate good in the good news of Christianity? Ultimately, the gospel is good news because it ends in God himself. You see, God is the gospel. All the words of the gospel lead us to God, or they're not gospel at all. The gospel ultimately gives us God. So the gospel talks about salvation. It saves from hell. And the gospel talks about forgiveness of sins and how we can have relief from guilt. And it talks about all sorts of other blessings that can come to us through the Lord Jesus Christ. But the gospel at the heart of Christianity is way more than all of those things. And it's way better than salvation from hell, or forgiveness, or relief from guilt of sin. Jesus died to give us far more than those things, and all the other wonderful things that we've been looking at so far in this series. So what's the greatest thing that Christ died for to bring us, to give us? Well, 1 Peter 3 verse 18 says, Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God. Jesus suffered and died on the cross to bring us to God. And that's the essence of the good news. That's the ultimate good in the good news. Well, why is that the case? Why is that needed? Well, people were created to enjoy seeing and savouring the glory of God. That was why we were made. We were made to behold God in all of his beauty and perfection. And we were made to delight in and be satisfied by this wonderful feast for our eyes. We were made to enjoy God. But sin has corrupted this. Sin makes other things, created things, the source of our joy and delight in place of God. And that dishonours God. And it brings God's judgment, condemnation. It brings death and it brings hell, ultimately separating us from joy and satisfaction in God alone. However, through the death of Jesus on the cross, God deals with sin and all of its effects in order to bring us to God and joy in God. The gospel of Jesus Christ is that at the cost of his son's life, God gives us himself, which is everything necessary to delight us and satisfy us for all eternity. God is the source of full and lasting pleasure. He revealed that about himself in Psalm 16 verse 11, which says, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Do you want fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore? Well, fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore are found in God himself and nowhere else. The gospel is that God sent Jesus Christ to suffer and die that he might bring us to God. This means that God sent Jesus Christ to suffer and die to bring us to fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore, to bring us to the deepest, longest joy that a human can have, because all of those things are found in God's presence, and the gospel brings us to God. So I invite you today to turn from the fleeting pleasures of sin that will not last and will not satisfy ultimately, and come to Christ to receive God himself and fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore. You know, Jesus, he couldn't have died to give us any more. He died to give us God himself and joy forever in him. See you all soon. Thanks for listening.